Everyone thinks they know how to survive The Walking Dead. Grab a gun, find some walls, avoid the cities, and you're golden. But almost every survival instinct viewers bring to this show is dead wrong, and 11 seasons of evidence prove it. So today, we're breaking down everything people get wrong about surviving the apocalypse, starting with the one mistake literally everyone would make on day one. Guns are your best friend. If you drop the average person into The Walking Dead's world, the first thing they do is find a gun. And honestly, that makes perfect sense. Rick Grimes does exactly that. He wakes up in a hospital, grabs a revolver, and rides into Atlanta like it's the obvious move. Early episodes are practically drowning in firearms. The whole aesthetic screams that whoever has the most firepower wins. But here's the thing, they don't. When you actually track the deadliest moments across 11 seasons, a disturbing pattern shows up. The governor rolls up to the prison with a tank in season 4, and the entire community collapses. The lineup scene in season 7, 0 walkers involved, pure human violence, enforced at gunpoint. Even the farm getting overrun in season 2 only spirals because sustained gunfire turns the whole area into a walker magnet. Guns don't just fail to protect people, they actively escalate the situations that get people killed. And that's before we talk about ammunition. Early on, characters burn through rounds like they're infinite, but by the prison era, every bullet matters. Characters start hand-loading casings, rationing magazines, and entire storylines revolve around the near-impossible task of arming up against the saviors. Guns jam, they misfire, they need maintenance that simply doesn't exist when industrial civilization is a memory. But the real killer, literally, is noise. Every gunshot acts like a dinner bell for every walker within earshot. The first trip into Atlanta nearly ends in disaster because of gunfire echoing through the streets. When the group tries to redirect a massive quarry herd in season 6, the entire operation nearly falls apart because of unexpected gunshots. One trigger pull can save you from the walker in front of you and summon 50 more behind you. So who actually survives long term? Daryl's crossbow is silent, reusable, and lethal. Michonne's katana lets her carve through walker-dense areas without making a sound. Even Rick gradually shifts to melee for routine kills. The characters who last the longest are the ones who stopped treating guns like a best friend and started treating them like a last resort, which is, not ideal for anyone whose entire zombie plan starts and ends with find the nearest gun store. But if you think relying on the wrong weapon is bad, wait until you hear what everyone gets wrong about where to hide. Cities are too dangerous. Rick Grimes rides a horse into downtown Atlanta, and within minutes he's surrounded by hundreds of walkers, trapped under a tank, and basically one bad decision away from becoming a buffet. That single sequence has convinced an entire fan base that cities are death sentences. And honestly, fair enough. It looked really bad for him. But here's the thing. That same city is the reason his group survives at all. Glenn, a former pizza delivery guy, knows Atlanta's streets like the back of his hand. Every shortcut, every alley, every rooftop access point. He uses that knowledge to run supply missions into the city over and over again, bringing back food, medicine, and gear that keep the entire quarry camp alive. Without those urban runs, the group starves. It's that simple. A pizza delivery background turned out to be one of the most valuable skill sets in the apocalypse, which is, not something the career counselors predicted, and Glenn isn't the only reason cities matter. Beth's entire hospital storyline only happens because Atlanta still has functioning medical infrastructure worth fighting over. The CDC gives the group its first real understanding of how the infection works. Later, the Commonwealth's entire civilization is built on urban infrastructure, stadiums, industrial facilities, transportation networks. Every single one of these critical turning points requires someone to walk back into a city that common sense says to avoid. Then there's the defensive angle nobody talks about. The Vados are running a nursing home in the heart of Atlanta, protecting elderly patients who can't fight and can barely walk. They're doing it successfully. Multi-story buildings create vertical advantages that open farmland simply can't offer. Stairwells become choke points. Rooftops become lookout posts. A single locked door on the 3rd floor buys you more time than a wooden fence around a barn ever will. Now let's talk about where the actual mass casualty events happen. The Green Farm gets completely overrun by a roaming herd that rolls across open fields with zero resistance. Gone in one night. The Alexandria quarry herd, tens of thousands of walkers, forms in a semi-rural area where geography accidentally pens them together like a ticking bomb. Neither of these disasters happens in a downtown core. They happen in exactly the kind of open, rural environments everyone assumes are safer. Cities are absolutely dangerous, but they're high-risk, high-reward environments that demand surgical strikes, not blanket avoidance. You go in with a plan, a route, an exit strategy, and you take what you need. The groups that treat cities as completely off-limits are the same groups that run out out of antibiotics and die from an infected cut. But even if you've got the perfect supply chain figured out, none of it matters if you think a big wall is all you need to sleep soundly at night. Walls keep you safe. The visual of high walls surrounding a community is one of the most powerful images in the entire show. You see those towering steel panels around Alexandria, and something in your brain just relaxes. Medieval castle energy. Nothing's getting through that. Rick's group arrives and they're genuinely stunned. Viewers at home feel it too. Build the walls high enough, make them thick enough, and you've solved the apocalypse. But here's the thing. Every major walled community in The Walking Dead is either destroyed, abandoned, or completely transformed. And almost none of them fall because walkers push too hard. Let's start with the prison. Rick's group pours an insane amount of effort into that place. They clear the yard, reinforce the fences, set up watchtowers, turn cell blocks into actual living quarters. Those fences hold back thousands of walkers over the course of months. Thousands. And then the first real crisis hits from inside. A viral infection rips through the population because it turns out cramming survivors into a sealed box is a great way to build a petri dish. Cool. Then, the governor rolls up with a tank, punches literal holes through the fences, and suddenly every walker in the county is pouring through gaps that brute undead force never could have created. The barriers that held against the dead were meaningless against one angry man with heavy artillery. Woodbury tells the same story with different details. Armed guards, floodlights, organized patrols. On paper, a fortress. But Woodbury doesn't collapse because the walls are too short. It collapses because the governor loses his mind. His paranoia fractures every relationship holding the community together, and the entire social structure that made those walls worth defending just dissolves. Then there's Alexandria, which is basically a controlled experiment in what happens when walls work too well. The perimeter is so effective that most residents have barely killed a walker by the time Rick shows up. They're soft. They've been living in a bubble where the walls did all the thinking for them. So when the wolves attack, a relatively small group of humans with knives cuts through Alexandria's defenses like they're decorative. And later, when a church tower falls onto the wall, which is, not ideal, a massive herd floods in and the entire defense system becomes a cage instead of a shield. One structural failure. That's all it took. The communities that actually last understand something critical. Walls are a starting line, not a finish line. Hilltop pairs its palisade with agriculture and trade routes. The kingdom supplements barriers with scouting patrols and a charismatic leader who invests in morale. They treat walls as one component of a larger strategy that includes diplomacy, intelligence gathering, and the ability to adapt when things inevitably go sideways. But if you think walls failing is scary, wait until you realize most people are wrong about what the actual biggest threat even is. The walkers are the real threat. The show is literally called The Walking Dead. The marketing is wall-to-wall zombies. The first scene is Rick shooting a little girl in the face. So yeah, most people walk into this franchise assuming the undead are the big problem to solve. Figure out how to kill walkers efficiently, build a good fence, don't get bit, and you're golden. But here's the thing, the walkers aren't even the main cause of death for the characters you actually care about. Think about every major death that hit you in the gut. Glenn, Abraham, bashed to death by a guy with a baseball bat. Denise took a crossbow bolt through the eye, courtesy of Dwight. Noah was ripped apart because of Nicholas's cowardice. Beth was shot point blank by a cop playing dictator in a hospital. Herschel was executed on his knees by the governor while his daughters watched. Not a single walker involved in any of those. And when you actually think about it, that makes perfect sense. Walkers are simple. They follow noise. They follow movement. They don't use tools. They don't strategize. And they certainly don't hold grudges. Once you learn the rules, walkers become a manageable environmental hazard. By mid-series, characters are walking through herds covered in guts, like it's a Tuesday commute. The mechanical problem of killing walkers is basically solved. Humans, though? Humans learn. Humans adapt. Humans escalate. The governor starts as a charming small-town leader and ends up rolling a tank through a prison fence. Negan builds an entire multi-community protection racket based on psychological terror and a very charismatic smile. The Whisperers literally wear walker skin and weaponize herds as living artillery. Each new human threat forces Rick's group to completely rethink their tactics, their alliances, and their moral boundaries. You can't cover yourself in guts to sneak past Negan, and here's where it gets really dark. The title of the show isn't actually about the zombies. Rick says it himself. We are the Walking Dead. The survivors are so saturated with violence and loss that they're barely alive in any way that matters. That's the real horror, not the corpses shambling down the highway, but what the living become when there's no law, no consequence, no structure. Terminus builds an efficient cannibalism operation. The saviors run forced labor camps. The Commonwealth resurrects class oppression complete with a caste system. Every single one of these is a sophisticated human nightmare that no walker could ever dream up. Walkers are dangerous, sure, but they don't lie. They don't negotiate in bad faith. They don't build totalitarian systems and then ask you to be grateful for it. The real survival skill in this world was never learning how to kill the dead. It was learning how to navigate the living. But if you think dodging human cruelty is hard on your own, wait until you hear why traveling in a big group might actually make everything worse. You should travel in a big group. Safety in numbers seems obvious. Rick's group at the Atlanta Quarry, sitting around campfires, sharing meals, taking turns on watch. It looks comforting. It looks secure. And for a lot of viewers, the fantasy of a big protective caravan becomes the default survival strategy. Big group equals more fighters, more skills, more eyes on the perimeter, right? Turns out, no. Every additional mouth needs food, water, medicine, ammunition, and shelter, and the math gets brutal fast. At the quarry camp, hunting and scavenging can't keep pace with consumption. By the time Rick's group reaches the prison and absorbs Woodbury's refugees, the population surge stretches infrastructure to the breaking point. Crowded quarters and close contact create the perfect conditions for an infectious disease outbreak that kills multiple residents before anyone can isolate it. The virus spreads inside the walls, not outside them, because too many people packed together turns a fortress into a petri dish. Security also gets more complicated with size, not less. A larger group can field more lookouts, sure, but it has a bigger perimeter to defend and more internal points of failure. The Saviors control multiple outposts and hundreds of soldiers, but that sprawl leaves them vulnerable. When Rick's alliance coordinates simultaneous strikes across their network, Negan's forces spread so thin that none of his sites are truly secure. The Commonwealth, despite tens of thousands of citizens, can't prevent dissent and infiltration within its own ranks. In massive populations, plots fester and the left hand doesn't know what the right is doing. Here's the thing. The longest surviving core characters began in small, tightly knit groups that grew cautiously. Rick, Daryl, Carol, Michonne. They're mobile enough to retreat when a location falls, small enough to make decisions collectively, and flexible enough to change strategies as threats evolve. When they lose the prison, they scatter into small groups and regroup later. When Alexandria is threatened, they hold the line with a tight, coordinated defense. Contrast that with the Commonwealth, which maintains its size at the cost of rigid class structure and propaganda that collapses the moment it's challenged from within. Fans love to imagine assembling 40 or 50 people and moving as a unit, thinking sheer numbers would deter bandits and overwhelm walkers. But in the show, large, poorly disciplined groups are easier to ambush, slower to move, and prone to panic. The governor's militia collapses spectacularly at the prison, with soldiers breaking and running when confronted by determined defenders in chaotic conditions, which is, not ideal when your whole strategy depends on overwhelming force. Beyond a certain point, each additional person adds as much risk as security, because managing conflict, dissent, and decision-making in large groups is itself an existential survival challenge. Small groups that grow slowly and remain willing to split under pressure consistently outlast massive formations that treat size as strength. But if you think group dynamics are the hardest part of survival, wait until you hear about how noise works in this world, because the common wisdom about staying silent is not just wrong, it's dangerously incomplete. Noise always means death. The early seasons of The Walking Dead train you like a dog. Every snapping twig gets a flinch. Every gunshot gets a wide shot of walkers turning their heads in unison. Characters whisper so much you'd think they were attending the world's worst library. And honestly, it works. By season 2, most viewers have internalized the rule without thinking about it. Noise equals death. Make a sound, attract walkers, get eaten. Simple, clean, absolute, and look, it's not wrong exactly. Walkers are attracted to loud, sudden noise. A gunshot, a dropped metal pipe, a baby crying at the worst possible moment. These things can and do collapse entire plans. Several of the show's most tense sequences hinge on exactly this. Someone makes a sound they shouldn't, and a manageable situation turns into a nightmare. Viewers understandably generalize those moments into a universal law, but here's where it gets interesting. The same property that makes noise deadly also makes it one of the most powerful tools in any survivor's arsenal. If walkers are mindlessly drawn to sound, that means sound is a leash, and the show proves this in spectacular fashion. The Alexandria Quarry operation in season 6 is the best example. example. A herd of tens of thousands of walkers has accumulated in a natural basin, and instead of fighting or hiding, the group decides to walk them like the world's most horrifying dog. Vehicles, flares, and sustained noise guide the herd along a planned route, redirecting an extinction-level threat away from the community. The plan nearly falls apart because of human interference, not because weaponizing sound fails. People were the problem, which is, a recurring theme. Beyond that, characters routinely deploy car alarms and sirens as diversions. Need to enter a swarming building? Toss something loud down the opposite corridor? Need to extract someone from a surrounded position? Fire up a car alarm 3 blocks away and wait. It requires something most panicking survivors don't have: the willingness to treat noise as a precision instrument instead of an accident. But the most counterintuitive detail is what happens when communities bring noise back on purpose. The kingdom doesn't operate in hushed whispers. Ezekiel encourages music, laughter, and theatrical performances. Kids play, people talk at normal volume. Alexandria eventually does the same. The Commonwealth takes it further with parties and public events that would make a Season 1 survivor have a panic attack. These aren't stupid decisions, they're survival decisions. Morale is a resource. A community living in permanent terrified silence will fracture from the inside. No walkers required. Music and laughter feed social cohesion in ways that extra canned beans never will. You can't rebuild civilization if everyone's too afraid to speak above a whisper. The real rule was never noise equals death. It was always ignorant noise equals death. A gunshot fired in panic with no exit plan? Catastrophic. A siren activated to pull a herd away from your actual objective? Genius. A community gathering behind defended walls with scouts posted? That's not reckless. That's human. But if controlling sound is a survival tool, wait until you hear how the show completely flips the script on another instinct everyone thinks is obvious: stockpiling everything you can carry. Hoarding supplies is the priority. There's a fantasy that lives in the back of every viewer's brain during the early episodes. Glenn sprints through Atlanta, stuffing bags with canned food and medicine, and you think, yeah, that's the move. Whoever fills the most shopping carts wins the apocalypse. It's basically a grocery store speed run with zombies. And honestly, for the first few weeks, that instinct isn't wrong. But here's the thing: canned goods have expiration dates. Fuel degrades, water contaminates, medicine loses potency. Without refrigeration or manufacturing, every item you hoard is on a countdown timer the moment you grab it. You're not building a stockpile. You're building a compost heap with extra steps. By the time Rick's group reaches the prison, the shelves are already picked clean. Every survivor within 100 miles has had the same brilliant idea of raiding the local Walmart. And shockingly, there's only so much Walmart to go around. The group is forced to start growing crops and raising livestock just to keep people fed. Nobody's making a highlight reel of Herschel teaching people how to irrigate bean rows, but it's the thing that actually works. And this is where the real shift happens. Hilltop doesn't survive because it found a bigger pile of stuff. Hilltop survives because it grows food, produces surplus, and trades that surplus with other communities. That's not a scavenger economy anymore. That's a production economy. That's the difference between looting a gas station and building a gas station. One of those has a future. The other one has maybe 6 months and a lot of expired beef jerky. But the hoarding problem goes deeper than spoilage. Concentrated resources attract predators. Every single time, Terminus builds its entire trap around this principle. Those who arrive survive. Translation: please walk into our pantry. You are the pantry. The saviors operate on the same logic from a different angle. Negan's entire power structure is built around taking half of everything other communities produce. Stockpiled supplies aren't just resources in this world. They're billboards that say, come take our stuff and probably kill us. Meanwhile, the community's focused on self-reliance and renewable systems rather than sitting on dragon hordes of canned peaches tend to avoid the worst of the violence. Funny how that works. The opportunity cost is what really kills the hoarding strategy, though. Every supply run is a gamble. You're sending your best people into unknown territory, burning fuel you can't replace, risking death, and for what? A couple boxes of stale crackers and some batteries that might still work? Compare that to spending those same hours securing a water source or planting crops that'll feed people for years. The math stops making sense pretty quickly. Fans love to imagine the apocalypse as a loot simulator. Clear the shelves, fill the basement, stack ammunition to the ceiling. It sounds great. It's also exactly the kind of thinking that gets communities wiped off the map. The groups that actually make it aren't the ones with the biggest stash. They're the ones who figured out how to make more. But if hoarding supplies paints a target on your back, wait until you see what happens when you walk through the front door of a community that seems to have it all figured out. You can trust organized communities. This is the one that gets people people killed more than anything else on this list. You've been sleeping in ditches, eating squirrels, watching friends die for months. Then you see walls, clean streets, someone smiling and offering a plate of food. Every cell in your body screams finally. Someone figured it out. And that desperate hope is exactly what the worst people in this world are counting on. Woodbury is the first real gut punch. Barbecues, families walking around, a charismatic leader talking about rebuilding civilization. Andrea buys in almost immediately. And honestly, most of us would too. But behind the friendly handshakes, there are torture chambers, gladiatorial walker fights run for entertainment, and a leader whose grip on sanity is deteriorating by the hour. Woodbury doesn't fall because walkers breach the walls. It falls because the entire social structure is built on one man's delusions. But Terminus makes Woodbury look like a HOA dispute. Those who arrive, survive, painted on signs along railroad tracks, broadcast on a radio frequency, deliberately designed to reach the most desperate survivors stumbling through the wasteland. When you get there, it looks legitimate. Infrastructure, organization, calm people greeting you at the gates. Then you end up in a rail car waiting to be butchered, because the entire operation is industrialized cannibalism with a supply chain. They built systems around it, processing areas, rotation schedules. That's not chaos, that's management, which is somehow significantly worse. The Saviors scale this into a full economy of coercion. Negan maintains multiple outposts, a hierarchical command structure, and genuinely stable production. In practice, every community under his protection is extorted, disarmed, and kept in permanent fear. Step out of line and someone gets an actual hot iron to the face. But hey, at least the trains run on time. Then there's the Commonwealth, which might be the most insidious, because it looks the most normal. Ice cream shops, sporting events, bureaucracy. Underneath that comforting veneer sits entrenched class inequality, political repression, and a ruling elite hoarding power while everyone else gets sorted into their pre-approved social tier. It's not a community, it's a corporation with a military. Here's the thing that ties all of these together. Organization itself is morally neutral. The efficiency that makes a community functional is the exact same efficiency that makes it dangerous when pointed in the wrong direction. Terminus didn't succeed at cannibalism because they were disorganized. They succeeded because they were extremely organized. That's the part nobody wants to sit with. The communities that actually earn trust, Alexandria, after it gets humbled, the kingdom at its best, they share a few things in common. Transparent governance, shared sacrifice, leaders who are visibly fallible. They invite participation instead of demanding obedience. They let newcomers ask questions without treating skepticism as treason. None of them are perfect, but they're honest about that imperfection, and that honesty is the single most reliable indicator a community might actually be worth joining. So the next time you see walls, uniforms, and a smiling leader promising safety, remember every lesson this show has taught across 11 seasons. The most dangerous thing in the apocalypse isn't the dead wandering outside. It's the living who figured out how to make you walk through the front door willingly. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.